Okay, Matt.
Okay, Chair. Yes, we're now live.
Thank you. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Plans Committee for Charnwood Borough Council. There are a number of things I would like to remind people of before we start with the items on the agenda. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. Under the openness of local government and bodies regulations, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Also, so that the meeting is not disturbed, could I ask everyone present to please turn off your mobile phones or switch them to silent and ensure your environment is distraction-free. And can I remind everyone that this is a public meeting, so please conduct yourselves in an appropriate manner. Thank you very much. As this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly differently. Members will need to introduce themselves and state their name and confirm that they can hear and see the proceedings. This is important for the purposes of recording attendance and transparency of the meeting. I will do this by undertaking an alphabetical roll call. Members will use the raise hand feature in the participant section of the Zoom software if they wish to speak, and will be allowed to do so in a queue system. Voting will be undertaken by roll call of all present in alphabetical order. Each member will state their name and how they wish to vote: for, against, or abstain. Speakers will be called forward at the appropriate time by the chair, and their microphone will be unmuted by the co-host. Speakers have 5 minutes each, and they will be timed by the co-host. When you have 1 minute of time remaining, a bell will sound. The co-host will mute you at the end of 5 minutes. If there are any technical problems with outside speakers presenting, then I will read out the speaker's statement, which has been sent in advance of the meeting. I'm now going to do a roll call of the names of each member in alphabetical order to confirm their attendance. Councillor Bailey.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Bailey present. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley here, Chair. I can both hear and see the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Camsell.
Councillor Camsell here, Chair. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Councillor Forrest here. I confirm that I can both see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I can confirm that. Councillor Grimley here. I can confirm that I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lowe here. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Ranson.
Good evening, Chair. I can see you and hear the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Councillor Savage.
Hello, Chair. I can hear and see you clearly.
Thank you. Councillor Snart.
Councillor David Snart. Madam Chairman, I'm present and can hear and see the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Good evening, Chair. I can both see and hear all the proceedings.
And Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Tillotson, I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. And I'm Councillor Fryer, and I'm the chair of this committee, and I can see and hear everybody. I'm now also going to confirm the officers that are in attendance. I won't ask you to say whether you can see or hear us. I'll just give the names out. So there's Jacqueline Jackson, Group Leader Development Management, Karen Brightman, Team Leader Development Management, Lewis Marshall, the Senior Planning Officer, Catherine Harrison, the Legal Advisor to the committee, Matt Gudger, who is the Information Development Officer and host for this meeting, Nikki Conway of Democratic Services Officer and co-host and clerk for this meeting, Sally Watson, Democratic Services Officer, and Karen Widdowson is also here, Democratic Services Officer and co-host for this meeting. We also have people here to speak to the application. For item 1, which is Iveshead Road, we have Clive Robinson, we have Councillor Radford and Councillor Popley, who are borough councillors. For item 2 at Naseby Drive, we have Charles Keane and Councillor Bolden. Now for the third item, which is Garendon Road in Chepstead, we've had a late application, a late representation to speak from Mr. McDowell in relation to this application. I am minded to allow this representation in the interest of fairness, but will ask the rest of the committee if they agree. Each councillor will be asked in alphabetical order if they agree or disagree to let Mr. McDowell speak. So, Councillor Bailey.
Agree.
Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley, agree.
Councillor Camsell.
Agree.
Councillor Forrest.
Agree.
Councillor Grimley.
Councillor Grimley here, agree.
Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Hamilton here, agree.
Councillor Lowe.
Agree.
Councillor Ranson.
Councillor Ranson, I agree.
Councillor Savage.
Councillor Savage, I agree.
Councillor Snart.
Councillor Snart, agree.
Councillor Tassell.
Councillor Tassell, I agree.
And Councillor Tillotson.
Councillor Tillotson here, I agree.
All right. Thank you very much. And as I say, I was minded to agree to this late representation. So if the officers could ensure that Mr. McDowell knows that he will be speaking when we get to that item. Thank you very much. I've lost where I am now. Oh, there we are. Right. Do we have any apologies?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Captain Harrison. Do we have any other speakers on item 3 other than the late speaker?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we do. We have, thank you, Mr. Jonah Mastin and Councillor Popley. Thank you very much for reminding me. That's what we need. Keep me in line. Okay, any apologies?
Chair, if I can, there's a message just popped up. I'm sure you've seen that.
Saying, whoa, now I've lost you all. Oh, that's Mr. Mastin. I'll leave that with the officers.
If I can, yeah, I was about to say, Chair, if you leave that with us and continue with the meeting, we'll sort that out with him.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies that have been notified?
No apologies have been received, Chair, for the meeting.
Thank you very much. The minutes of the previous meeting, the committee, I'm asking if the committee would confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of May 2020. I will now call on each committee member in alphabetical order to respond. Councillor Bailey.
Agreed.
Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley, agreed.
Councillor Camsell. Councillor Camsell. You haven't unmuted yourself, Councillor.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest. Councillor Forrest. Councillor.
Sorry, Chair, I agree.
Thank
I
you.
agree the minutes are a correct record.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grimley.
Councillor Grimley here. I agree.
Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Hamilton, I agree.
Councillor Lowe.
I had internet problems, Chair, so I'll abstain if you don't mind.
Oh yes, you weren't with us, were you? Councillor Ransom.
Chair, I agree.
Councillor Savage.
I agree, Chair.
Councillor Snart.
Madam Chairman, I agree.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
I agree.
And Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree.
And I, as the Chair, Councillor Fry, also agree the minutes. Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting have been confirmed as a correct record, and I will sign them. Item 3 on the agenda is questions under committee procedure 12.8. No questions were submitted. And could the clerk confirm?
I can confirm no questions were submitted, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item 4, disclosures of pecuniary and personal interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? The clerk, Sally Watson, I think you have a statement to read out.
Yes, I believe all of the Plans Committee members received correspondence from one of the objectors in relation to application P200618 64 Ives Head Road, Shepshed. I believe nobody read the correspondence, and so all committee members remain impartial.
Could all members present please confirm this is the case and that you have received the papers and it's all in order, that it has not affected any decisions you may make? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I did receive the correspondence. I have not read those correspondence and retain an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley, thank you, Chair. I also received the correspondence, but didn't read it, so I come here with an open mind.
Councillor Camsell.
Yes, Chair. I also received. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I also received correspondence, but I've not read anything. I come with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest. Councillor Forrest.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I did indeed, like others, receive photographs, but I didn't read them. I'm entirely an open mind about this application.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Councillor Grimley here. I did receive the papers, but I'd not read them, although I did scan them and send them across.
Thank you.
That is.
I think when Councillor Grimley says he sent them across, he sent them to development to make sure they were all attached to the Planning Explorer. Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Hamilton, I can confirm I received correspondence. I didn't read it and retain an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Same, Chair. I received the correspondence, didn't read it, and am here with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Ransom.
Chair, ditto. I received the papers through the door and I didn't read them and notified the department.
Councillor Savage.
I confirmed I got the letter, and I never read them, and I'm got a completely open mind on the subject.
Thank you. Councillor Snart.
I received the papers, didn't read them, and have an open mind.
Councillor Tassell?
I received the envelope with some papers in. I didn't read them, but I have declared an interest in this because it is in Shepshed. It is not in my ward. Therefore, I come with an open mind.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't receive any papers. I did receive 3 emails relating to this application, but I haven't read them, so I do have an open mind.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're all here with an open mind. Although we did receive papers, they've all been either recycled or just not read. Right, we're now moving on to the planning applications, and at today's meeting we have 3 applications to consider, and their details are...
Yeah, I've had my hand up.
Sorry?
Yeah, about item 2, I received emails from neighbours, the Naseby Drive, but I've come in with an open mind still.
Okay, thank you very much. Has anybody else got any declarations of interest on any of the other applications? No? Okay. Councillor Tassell.
Yes, there is another planning application in for Shepshed, which is Garrington Road. Even though it's in Shepshed, it is not in my ward, and I come with an open mind on it.
Thank you very much. No one else? Thank you. That's all been noted. Thank you very much. So the details of the 3 applications we're looking at tonight are set out in the InGen and the extras report. So we move now to item 1, which is P20/0618/2, 64 Iveshead Road, Shepshed, which is pages 8 to 22 in your agenda pack. So we now move to public speaking. Can we have the presentation, please, by Karen Brightman, who is going to present this application?
Good evening, members. This first item tonight is a planning application for the erection of a replacement dwelling. It's actually a revised scheme because the planning permission that was initially granted, once construction work started on that, it was apparent that what was being built was slightly different in a couple of ways to what had been approved. So as a result, there is a revised planning application submitted, which is what's before you tonight. Next slide, please. This is the location of the site. So you'll see it's on Iveshead Road in Shepshed on the left-hand side, just as you're coming away from the town and off the A512. Next slide, please. This is an aerial photograph taken of the site. So the blue arrow denotes the curtilage of the dwelling itself. Next slide, please. These are some officer photographs of the site, and they show the dwelling that's currently under construction. So you can see these are, I won't go through each one, they're all shots taken into the site from the front, and you can see the dwelling itself is the one that's got sort of 2 different height roofs there, that's in the centre of most of those pictures. Next slide, please. These are some pictures taken of the street scene generally on Iveshead Road. So that's looking south along Iveshead Road, and the red circle denotes where the replacement dwelling is being put in. Next slide, please. This is just the same picture taken from the opposite direction. So you'll note from these pictures that there's quite a wide variety of dwelling types and heights and sizes along Iveshead Road itself. Next slide, please. The street scene at the top is what already has been approved. So you'll see from that on the left-hand side, there is a bungalow, number 62, which is a sort of quite a low traditional bungalow. There is actually a planning consent for demolition of that bungalow in connection with providing access to some land at the rear, but obviously that demolition may or may not happen. And on the right hand side, number 66 there is a hip roof bungalow, which it has itself been extended. That just gives you the context. And below is the elevation as proposed. So you'll see there's a dotted line on that elevation. That is the bungalow that has permission. The solid line at the top is the slightly higher ridge height of tonight's proposal. Next slide, please. These are the elevations that are proposed. So top left-hand corner is the rear elevation. Below it, front elevation from the road, and then the two side elevations there. So the top one is obviously the top of the two side elevations is would be the right hand side, sorry, from the road, and the slide below it would be the left hand side from the road with the chimney on it. Next slide, please. These are the proposed floor plans for the dwelling. It's a 4-bedroom bungalow with a guest room as well. I say bungalow, it's obviously a dormer bungalow because one is the ground floor and one is the first floor. Next slide, please. This is a section of the bungalow. What I needed, or what I should have said, is I should have explained to you what the difference between the extant scheme and this current proposal is. And there are three main differences. The first and obviously the biggest, most material change is that the height of the ridge has increased from the existing, from the permission that has consent. So that original ridge height was 7.24 meters high. This proposal is 8.08 meters high. So there is a difference of about 84 centimeters, which is 33 inches, between what has planning permission and what is current, and the planning permission that's currently being sought. And that difference is only in the ridge. The eaves height is exactly as the extant permission that was granted. The other differences are, as we saw earlier on the elevations, that there's now an external chimney added to one side of the property. And there's also a very small change to the layout of the front garden. There's a decrease in the amount of lawn that's within that front garden. Next slide, please. And this illustrates that. So where you see those two cars parked on the block plan here, there was a small area of lawn there, which is no longer proposed. So they've increased the area of hard standing slightly. Next slide, please. So the key considerations before members tonight, obviously, all relate to what the differences are between what already has planning consent and what is now being put forward with the material changes. So the principle of the development itself has already been established. So there's no need for members to revisit that. The design and the appearance, particularly within the street scene, is obviously the most material change. The ridge height is higher, and the decision has to be whether that increase in height means that the dwelling remains in keeping with the surroundings and the nature of the area. The officer's view is that it does, primarily because, as we saw on the earlier slides, there's quite a wide mixture of dwelling types and heights within the street. So it's not as if it's a very uniform street scene that this is alien to. And also there are changes in levels, which means that as you're travelling along Ives Head Road, the fact that there are variations in those roof heights isn't an unusual thing. So it isn't something that is particularly prominent or visually an issue in the street scene. And the other thing also to bear in mind is that the previously approved scheme was also higher than the dwellings on either side, albeit not as much higher as this one is, but it was nevertheless the situation for the approved application as well. There's obviously a need to consider the impact on neighbouring properties. There is an increase in height. Officers have looked at that, as you'll see from the report, and they can confirm that it still meets with the tests set out in the SPD to determine whether there's any material loss of light, privacy or outlook. Highway issues, again, there is no change really since the extant permission, other than a marginal increase in the amount of hard surfacing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We now have 3 speakers, so I'll ask Mr. Robinson, Mr. Clive Robinson, who is the agent on behalf of the applicant.
I'm just waiting for him to unmute himself.
Okay. When you're ready, Mr. Robinson.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, committee.
Mr. Robinson, I'm just confirming that you can hear the proceedings.
I can hear you.
Okay, so your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you. The proposal at 64 Iveshead Road in Shepshed is, as we all know, now currently in the process of construction, having previously been approved back in January 2019. The two items, or as you heard tonight, 3, that need to be considered are as follows. The main issue is the increase in the ridge height, which has increased from 7244 to 8080 millimetres, or 836 millimetres, as measured from the ground level. There has also been a chimney breast, which is added to the elevation facing number 62, and a slight decrease in the area of grass on the frontage. It is suggested that the ridge height needs to be looked at in the context of the whole street scene and not just the immediate neighbouring properties on the same side of the street. This would show that greater ridge height differentialities already exist in the same street. This is due to the original bungalows being placed next to 2-storey properties and the impact of the road being on a hill, as well as to other new extensions and developments which have taken place. All other items like footprint, materials, form, massing and front and rear dormers are all as per the original approval scheme P/18/2310/2, approved in January 2019, which was subject to 4 conditions which have now been addressed. The use height remains the same. Due to the nature of the street scene, we believe it would be fair and reasonable to allow the amended ridge height and addition of a chimney to stand, and this would be our suggestion to committee, as the proposal complies with all SPD guidance. That's our statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. We now have Councillor Radford, who I believe is speaking as the ward councillor.
Councillor Radford, can you confirm that you can hear?
I can hear. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yeah, so your time starts now.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am speaking as a town councillor and not as a borough councillor. So I'm speaking on behalf of the town council and all the council have concerns about the height of the roof. The town council did not write in against the original application as the height of the roof was acceptable to the council. It was not much higher than the bungalows on either side or the other bungalows on Iveshead Road. The town council did write in with their concerns when the second application, the one now being considered, was submitted due to the fact that it is far higher than the original application, and this does not address the concerns raised by the officer previously. And this is nearly well over a metre higher. I do hope that councillors have been and had a look at the site, and I ask on behalf of the Town Council that the Planning Committee refuse this application on the scale, over-domineering and the appearance of this development. We would also like to ask why this did not go to the enforcement team when they knew it wasn't being built as per the original planning application, and this was not built in accordance with the approved plans, or why it's not been put in as a retrospective planning application rather than submitting a new application. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm looking at the officers now. Do you want to answer those questions now, or would you rather wait until you'd heard from Councillor Popley?
I think, Chair, it'd be appropriate to wait until all the speakers have spoken.
Thank you. Councillor Popley.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Okay, your time starts now, Councillor Popley.
Thank you, Nikki. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, fellow councillors and officers. The original submitted scheme for 64 Ives Head Road proposed the new dwelling would have an eaves height of 2.63 metres, an overall ridge height of 8.314 metres. After discussion between all parties, this was lowered significantly to an eaves height of 2.53 metres and an overall ridge height of 7.24 metres. The previous application was granted conditionally on the 31st of January 2019 under delegated powers. The new proposal is to increase the ridge height to circa 8.808 metres, an increase from the previously disclosed height of 7.84 metres. This alteration only came to light when new plans were recently published. I'm aware of at least 12 households contacting Development Control about this, alongside comments presented by the Town Council. Residents have also contacted me directly, appending images in some cases. Many, I understand, have been provided to the Planning Department. Correspondence, I note, is continuous. I admit that I do find it disconcerting how a little over 12 months after discussions took place to lower the height of the roof to one that was deemed more appropriate, it appears to be inching toward the originally desired ridge height exceeding 8 metres. I'd like to draw members' attention to the 5th paragraph on page 9 of tonight's revised papers. I find this statement ambiguous. How can it be argued on one hand the original scheme was reduced through negotiation, but on the other say this is not to say that the proposal would have not been accepted in its original form? CS2 of the core strategy reads, high quality design requires new developments to make a positive contribution to Charnwood, resulting in quality inclusive design which responds positively to its context. Policy CS3 then refers to mixed dwelling types. For context, only weeks ago, another application a few hundred yards away from this site was refused. Amongst the reasons for refusal were there be an adverse change to the street scene and surrounding areas. In that instance, some dwellings were deemed too domineering on the skyline due to their height and roofs. This entrance into our town is considered to be one of natural beauty. Again, I would argue the application in question tonight would similarly dominate the street scene. Design is also alluded to in the local plan of policy EV/1 and also further referenced in paragraph 130 of the National Planning Policy Framework 2019, hereafter the NFPP, which indicates how important design is deemed as a material planning consideration. Paragraph 38 of the NFPP identifies how liaising with all parties is an essential factor in making applications a success. It would appear that there have been positive and agreeable conversations previously, and negotiation took place to accommodate a proposal which allowed for construction, but in a measured way, sensitive to the locality. It has been noted that there are at least 8 other neighbouring properties within the vicinity, and at least 2 others on the opposite side of the road, where each dwelling has been built in accordance with those neighbouring properties. Finally, I must cite policy CS1 of the core strategy, which refers to the provision of sustainable development across the borough. It may be argued this new dwelling reduces Shepshire's total quota, yet I'm in a quandary how this can be considered a true reflection, being built like for like. Therefore, I firmly believe the revised application should be rejected, citing the planning concerns I have argued. It is my belief that the application, as granted conditionally on the 31st of January 2019, should now be adhered to in full, and construction henceforth should follow those proposals identified within. Thank you all again for your time.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm now looking to the officer. Would you like to come back on the points that have been raised? by the speakers?
Yes, just going through those. The point was made about the fact that the previous scheme had there'd been negotiations to achieve the lower ridge. I just want to point out that it gained approval not just because of the height of the ridge. It was a series of things, and that wasn't determinant in the decision. So there's still a need to make a judgment as to whether this slightly higher or this higher ridge height is so creates a design that members aren't happy with. Officers' view is still that even with the ridge higher than it was originally, it remains in context for the reasons given, and those reasons are that the street scene itself is very varied in nature. I think the point was also mentioned about enforcement action, and I just want to make it clear that our enforcement team were involved, and it was an enforcement case, and obviously as a result of that's why a planning application is now before you for the scheme that they picked up that was different from that had been built. I think I've probably covered most of those points. I think I've probably covered most of those points. Hopefully answered those questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brightman. I'm now opening it up to discussion by the committee. Can you use the raise hand indicator? Is anybody waiting to speak or want to comment? We have to move on. Councillor Bailey.
Sorry, Chair, but you missed me out. I've had my hand up quite a while.
I think
did I?
Before me, yes.
I didn't see the blue hand, I'm afraid. Right.
It's there.
Councillor Tassell.
Right. I went up on Sunday afternoon to have a look at this development because I hadn't taken much notice of it before, to be quite honest, because the last time I saw it, it hadn't got a roof on. But I did go up and have a look at it, and I don't think, to be quite honest, the officers' photographs do the area any justice. The area that this bungalow is in, or this dormer bungalow is in a row of bungalows, a row of 8 bungalows, all of just varying heights, because some have got bedrooms in the roof. But it didn't do, those photographs didn't do the area justice. The other thing that I want to ask us was, why didn't this come through as, we asked for the enforcement team, but why didn't it come through as a retrospective planning application? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Ms. Brightman or Ms. Jackson, do you want to answer those questions before I move on to Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, I think there's some confusion about a retrospective application. All planning applications are planning applications. We determine whether, that there might be different descriptions, and we can use retrospective application that in the description, but there's not a different type of application. So I think members are saying, well, why didn't this come in? It's because it's a revision of an existing permission, and that revision was for an erection, and that's what this description says. It's for an erection of a dwelling, and it says that it's a revised scheme and refers to the previous scheme. So that's why there's that difference, but actually there's no difference in the type of application coming forward. It is a material planning consideration, the last permission. So members here need to consider whether the harm caused by this is so significant that it was, when comparing it to what's already been granted, which again is something that is an unusual situation, but it's something that members do have to grapple with as part of this consideration.
Councillor Tassell, did you want to come back?
Okay, thank you very much. In the envelope, I understand, which I didn't read, there were some photographs. Have you got those on the slides at all?
I believe they are on the Planning Explorer, but they're not part of this presentation, but the officer will. We've had our photographs, but if one of the officers would like to come back on that, but they are not as part of the evidence for the discussion tonight.
But we have been able to see them on the Planning Explorer, haven't we? And so
Well,
therefore, I'm hoping that the other councillors have been able to look and see.
I haven't,
the
in all
difference.
honesty, I didn't look at anything because it was all part of presentation, if you like, and therefore I did not look at any of the photographs or any of the papers that were sent to us. I have
But
only
surely,
gone.
if it's put on the portal, it is there for the public to see as well as us. Sorry, but if it was confidential, they shouldn't have been put on the portal.
It wasn't confidential.
No,
it was just
so therefore, Charnwood shouldn't have put it on the portal for everybody to see. They should have kept it to themselves. But you've made it public. That's what I'm saying, is that the whole thing has been made public now, so anybody could have looked at it.
Right, no point. I've got with one of the officers, Jacqueline Jackson.
Yeah, the correspondence that was sent to each member, which obviously has a lobbying implication, has now been passed to the planning officers and attached to the planning file. Those comments are now viewable on the planning file and also is summarised in the extras report, the content of that. So it's if members members will have read the extras report and that summarises the content of those letters.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's probably going to be an unpopular view, but I quite like it. I think there's nothing wrong with a bit of difference in a street. I think it was mentioned by one of the officers that the street is quite varied anyway. So therefore, I'd go with the officer's recommendation and propose its application.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Lowe has alluded to, it's quite there's quite a lot of variation throughout the street scene anyway. Currently, I think if this was put in front of us as it is, I think it would, there was no objection. I think like most members, it's the way it's been done, the fact that it's already been built and then it's come to us, I think is an annoyance. And I also appreciate that's not a planning consideration, but I think it needs to be noted that this is not the way to do a planning application. I haven't actually got an issue with it at all in purely on a plans basis, in which case I would second Councillor Lowe's recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Snart.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I'm just looking through the notes and just to test my understanding, and there's been a lot of reference to this tonight, and it does say in the notes or our papers, whilst the original scheme was reduced through negotiation, this is not to say the proposal would have been not acceptable. So could officers just tell me why the negotiation took place and what was the reason for it?
Originally a scheme was submitted that we weren't happy with for various reasons. So the reason, what the officers trying to say in the report is that it wasn't solely because the ridge height was seen as unacceptable. So there would be a package, as there often are with planning applications, of negotiations to improve the quality of the design. And part of that was, in that case, to reduce the ridge height. But the point the report is making is that if that hadn't been agreed to at that time, that wouldn't necessarily have meant that the planning application was refused. It's good practice to discuss and to try to revise designs as they're ongoing. And there is a line in that judgment where you might say this is now of such a design that we don't like it and it doesn't meet with our policies and we would refuse it. That line and the decision that members have to take tonight is whether that line has been crossed in this increase in height of the ridge. And I would point out it's only the ridge that's increased in height of 84 centimetres. and again, I would go back to the assessment in the report, which is that the street scene itself is very varied. Both of those proposals were in fact higher than the bungalows on either side. And it is a case of assessing it as part of that overall varied street scene. And that's the judgment that members need to take tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest. Councillor Forrest. She's lost Matt. She says she's lost. She can't hear.
Councillor Forrest, can you remove your headphones, unplug your headphones, just to see if you can hear without?
Can you unplug your headphones, Councillor Forrest? Councillor Forrest, take them off there and unplug them. Oh, she's gone.
Chair, if Councillor Forrest hasn't heard this whole debate,
she can't vote anyway.
She can't vote anyway. So maybe one of the officers could give her a call and help her that way.
Yes, if she hasn't heard the whole debate. Is there anybody else want to speak? We may have to wait a couple of seconds to see, because if she hasn't heard the whole debate, she's obviously left the room. So if she's left the room, I presume we can carry on. Councillor Tillotson and then Councillor Ransom. Councillor Tillotson.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Lowe. I think this is acceptable, and with Councillor Bailey that it's not the right way to do it, but if it had come before us as an application, I think we would have accepted it. I'm not sure, did Councillor Bailey second Councillor Lowe's proposal? He did, right, okay, that's fine then. I'm happy to support officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Ransom.
Thank you, Chair. I must also agree, but the one thing is, here I come again, Chair, and you're going to go under the table about you, is the conditions of hours of working. Can we make sure that the hours of working, I know they're already in place, but I see in one of the comments in one of the of the people is that the hours were quite early. Am I under the right impression?
I think Jacqueline Jackson, but I think the conditions have been set.
Thank you, Chair. The conditions aren't set. The conditions are for members to think about. I do have to question why that is necessary. Obviously, a considerable proportion of the work has been completed. It's only the roof and then internal works left to do. I'd also point out that the government has asked councils, planning departments specifically, to relax hours of conditions in view that social distancing means that you can't get as many tradesmen on site. So we've been given a direct indication that we shouldn't be using them in the current time. Now, obviously, normally we'd be looking 3 years ahead. So you might say, well, it won't be happening now, but we know that this is part built and the rest of the construction is going to happen imminently. So my recommendation is that you wouldn't do that.
Thank you very much for your explanation.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe, I saw your hand up earlier. Did you want to come back?
It was only to point out the government, what the government said about working time.
Thank you very much. I have no further. Oh, Councillor Forrest is now back, but I think she's still, we can't hear.
No, I am back. Sound has been restored, and I didn't want to speak. I had put my hand up to indicate that I was having problems.
All right, so you have heard. You have heard all the discussions, and you've heard the whole presentation, because otherwise we cannot let you vote, I'm afraid, unless you've heard everything.
I am happy not to vote, Chair, because I am not satisfied that I did hear all of the conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll discount you for voting.
Thank you.
Catherine Harrison. No, it was just about what I just said. So I have no further speakers, so we'll now move on to the vote, and this will be done again alphabetically, and it is for, against or abstain. So Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bailey, for.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley, for.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Councillor Campbell, against.
Councillor Forrest is not voting. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Grimley, for.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Hamilton, for.
Hello.
For, Chair. Councillor Lowe.
Councillor Ransom.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Savage.
Councillor Savage, for, Chair.
Councillor Snart.
Councillor Snart, for.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Against.
Thank you. And Councillor Tillotson.
Councillor Tillotson, for.
Thank you. And I myself am voting for. Councillor Fry. Right, as one of the officers, I've got that as on my checklist. I have it, there's 10 for, 2 against, and 1 person that couldn't vote at all. Do I have an officer that can confirm that?
Thank you, Chair. Captain Harrison. Yes, I confirm. I can vote the same. Actually, the proposal was carried by a vote of 10 for, 2 against, and Councillor Forrest did not take part in the vote.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We now move on to the item 2 of the applications, which is P200434 /2 35 Naseby Drive, Loughborough, pages 23 to 31 in your agenda. So Karen Brightman, I think you're presenting this one as well.
That's correct, Chair. Thank you. The second item on the agenda, members, is an application for extensions at a dwelling at Naseby Drive in Loughborough. Next slide, please. This is where the house is located. So you'll see number 35 there in the middle of the red line area. Next slide, please. This is an aerial picture of the house circled in red. Next slide, please. This is a picture taken from Naseby Drive itself. So you'll see that the dwelling's set quite a long way back from Naseby Drive at the side of a shared drive that serves 3 dwellings. There's a double garage in front that also belongs to the property, which is sort of roughly in the middle of the shot. Next slide, please. This is the front of the property from closer up. Again, you can see the garage there that gives the context of this picture compared to the previous one. And you'll see behind the garage that there is some extensive tree planting that forms part of a linear planting belt along an old railway line to the side of the house. Next slide, please. This is the rear of the property. You see on the right-hand side, there are some outbuildings. Those are behind the garage that you could see on the previous slides. Next slide, please. That's the rear of the property again with the garage building from a little bit closer up, and you can see at the back of that photograph the properties that are opposite served off the same private drive as this particular application property. Next slide, please. the block plan of the proposal. So you'll see number 35 there. And the sort of hatched red area is where the extensions are proposed to go. So they basically infill to the side of the property. They join up with the existing garaging that's at the end of the private drive. And the part that is to the rear of the rear wall of 35 is the single story part of the extension. So the 2-story bit is basically in line with where 35 is at the moment. Next slide, please. These are the existing and proposed elevations. So you've got the existing front elevation at the top, it's the side gable of the garage, and the shot you saw earlier with the porch. Underneath that is the proposed front extension. So it comes off the side of the existing dwelling, same ridge and eaves height, but set behind the garage. And then on the right hand side of the slide, you've got the existing side elevation looking towards the garage at the top and the proposed below. So you can see that there's some infilling between the existing garage and the dwelling, albeit quite limited. And there's also an extension with a mono-pitched roof that projects out to the rear. Next slide, please. Again, these are the proposed, existing and proposed elevations. At the top, that's the existing rear that we saw on the photographs. And just below it, also to the right of the slide, is the proposed rear elevation. So again, you can see there the 2-story projection to the side and the single-story projection for the garden room element coming out at the rear. And then on the left-hand side of your slide there, you've got the same for the side elevation. So it's the existing side elevation at the top and the side elevation as proposed underneath, which shows the wall that links through to the garage behind the existing joining garage that there is at the moment. Next slide, please. These are the proposed floor plans. So you can see the plan at the top is the ground floor plan. So you can see from that the area outlined in red is what the applicant wants to do, which is to build a sort of extended living kitchen area with doors opening out onto the garden and roof lights, and to provide a sort of a link through between the garages. And at the bottom of the slide, you have the first floor plan. So you'll see from that there are 2 new bedrooms proposed and an ensuite bathroom. Next slide, please. The main issues tonight are those that would typically be considered for an extension to a dwelling. So first of all, the character and appearance of that extension, whether it's in keeping with its surroundings. Officers typically would assess that against the policies in the development plan and the design SPD. Their view is that this proposal meets with that. They are large extensions and they are similar in height to the existing dwelling, but they are tucked away in a fairly secluded location where they're not particularly visible other than from directly outside the property. They don't create any terracing impact or any of the things that typically we'd be looking for, and they're in keeping in terms of materials and styling with the existing dwelling. Amenity is obviously another big consideration with extensions. Officers have looked at the impact in terms of light, outlook, privacy, as they normally would, and there are no material impacts on neighbouring properties as a result of the extension. There has been a neighbour objection from the property opposite about overlooking from the proposed extension, but that relationship would be no different than the relationship that currently stands with the existing dwelling. And additionally, it is across an area of public space rather than across private gardens. Highways and parking obviously have to be looked at. This does increase the number of bedrooms at the dwelling, and as a result there would be a need to provide or the recommendation that would come from the development plan is that there should be 3 spaces provided as a result of this. because it's a shared drive, it's important to secure those spaces and to make sure they can be provided within the land that the applicant owns. So as a result, it is recommended that there is a condition attached that requires submission of a plan as to where those spaces would be before the extension is occupied. So it would enable it to be built, but not occupied unless we're satisfied that those three dwellings, those three parking spaces can be provided within the site. Other matters to mention are neighbours have raised through the extras report and as objections into this application concerns over ownership and encroachment onto adjacent land, and those are twofold. There are concerns about how the private driveway is used, which is the reason in particular that we're seeking or recommending that there should be a pre-occupation condition relating to parking. But there are also some concerns about encroachment onto the tree belt at the side, which has been looked into, and there's no, officers are satisfied that that won't happen, and that the proposal is entirely within its own red line and not encroaching onto the Charnwood owned land at the side. There's also the distance from trees within that important structural belt is sufficient that there wouldn't be harm to those trees. So officers are satisfied about that as well. And as a result, the recommendation is that it's approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have two speakers. If I could call on Mr. Charles Keane.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Keane, time starts now.
Good evening, all. I'd just like to highlight discrepancies I believe required to be addressed by the Plans Committee. There's been a name change for the applicant to Mr. T. Burton from a Mr. R. James. Second, the reference documents show that the proposals include for the demolition of outbuildings and the change of use of an original workshop, which is a reference number P/81/2554/2, close brackets, into a garage with a height alteration and from a flat roof to a sloping roof with reduced front entrance. No comments have been expressed by the planning officer regarding this. 3, by remaining silent on a prior land grab, the drafting of plans and drawings, all reference number James LE11 31, 32, 31, 32, 41, 42, and 51 do not accurately or fully describe the proposed development, and any omission needs to be rectified before the planning or before the application is proceeded any further. Similarly, the site location and the block plan, which was already shown in the presentation, i.e. drawing James LE11 051, erroneously includes the two property frontages of 37 and 39 to the plot size. Number 4, there are no notes or comments relating to any environmental impact on the trees, wildlife, flora, fauna, due to the proximity of the proposal along the property's northern boundary, which was mentioned, the railway track, i.e. it's a civic amenity area owned by Charnwood Borough Council. Number 5, the works, whilst deemed to be a minimum of 14 metres from number 37 should, because of its size, be considered over-dominant and overbearing on the site and too large for the general amenity of the area neighbourhood. A further discrepancy on page 27, i.e. an increase in the number of bedrooms at the property from 3 to 5, that really needs to be clarified and amended to the reality, which was an increase from 4 to 5 rooms. Lastly, furthermore, the submission of a plan showing an additional 3 parking spaces together with the three current garage spaces for approval will not be sufficient or adequate to ensure safe off-street parking and on-street parking, as has been shown in the case since January of this year. As far as anything else I wish to say, that is in conclusion, and thank you for your time. End.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keane. Does either any of the officers wish to come back on those points at this stage, or do you wish to wait until we hear from the next speaker? I gather we'll wait till we heard the next speaker, and then I will call back on the points raised by Mr. Keane. Councillor Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Keane has identified forensically all the concerns and discrepancies in the application that need to be addressed by the committee. I'd just like to highlight to the committee that there is strong opposition to the application from neighbours, and I would like the committee to give it their full attention and consider that, in my view, it's an overdevelopment, especially considering that it's virtually doubling the size of the existing house. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldwin. I'm now coming back to the officers to make any comments on the points raised by Mr. Keane and Councillor Baldwin. Who would like to speak first, or no comment?
There were quite a lot of points there raised, so hopefully I'll cover as many of those as I can. Planning history was raised. I think a planning application that goes back to 1981. Not all planning applications will necessarily be listed in an officer report if they're not seen to be relevant. That's obviously quite an old application and of little bearing on the consideration of this particular extension. There was reference to the extent of the planning application red line and the fact that that went up to adjacent properties. The red line I need to just clarify that the red line doesn't represent ownership, it represents the planning application site, and it's usually the case that the access to a development will be included within that red line, and that will be why that red line is shown as it is, but it has very little bearing on the actual planning application that's being sought, which is the extension itself. Mr. Keane also mentioned parking and the fact that he considered that there wasn't enough parking at the property and that 3 spaces wouldn't be enough. We're bound by what our development plan policies say, and those say that for a house of this size, or in fact any house of 3 or more bedrooms, 3 parking spaces is the suggested standard. It doesn't go up any more beyond that, so there aren't any requirements in the development plan to seek more than 3 parking spaces for a dwelling. There was reference to overdevelopment. That's obviously a judgment for members to take tonight, so I'm not going to comment on that. I hope I've covered everything, but I don't know whether Jackie might want to pick up if I've missed anything.
No, no sign. Right, you can always come back when I've got 4 people wishing to speak at the moment. So, Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. this is a difficult one, because I think if it was situated anywhere else, it probably would be classified as overbearance. But I think the fact that it's tucked out the way as it is, I think you can get away with it slightly. With regards to just a couple of questions, if I may, on page 27 of our report, it states that a condition could be imposed to ensure that this level of parking is provided and retained. But in the conditions itself, it says provided and maintained. I know that's splitting hairs, but there's a difference between maintaining a parking space and retaining it for perpetuity. So I'm just wondering whether that just needs tweaking if we can. I do have a slight concern really with regards to the garage. Is there a way that we can impose restriction that the garage can't be changed into residential rather than from a garage as well? So they're just my few questions.
Thank you. Did Jacqueline Jackson, you want to come back on those 2 points?
Yeah, just coming back to the condition on page 29, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Talks about the 3 parking spaces, and the last line of that is that the approved parking spaces shall be provided prior to occupation of the extension hereby approved, and thereafter so retained in perpetuity. So that means that they have to be retained as parking spaces in perpetuity. So we would be able to take action if they weren't retained as parking spaces under that condition. In terms of the garage, members could, but you'd have to justify it against planning policy. And our planning policy says that for a house of this size, 3 parking spaces is what is necessary. So how you could then justify protecting more than 3, I would question whether you would then be able to justify that and it would meet the test for a planning, for the planning conditions. So that's all I'll say on that matter.
If I could come back, Chair, just briefly on the garage thing, it's nothing to do with the parking spaces. It's more the fact that this is such a large extension that's joining the garage onto a very large extension. I have concerns that within 6 months, they'll turn around to us and say, well, we'll just suck the garage into the living space as well.
I'll let the officers ponder on that, and we'll see if there's some more questions. Thank you, Councillor May. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Grimley here. It is a very large extension, but given the sort of size of area that it's in, I don't see that's too much of a problem. I do have concerns about the design, but don't think that we have a current document for extensions in place at the moment. The old design guide did give design tweaks, but that's now out of date. So I don't have any real objections to this, unfortunately, that I can justify.
Thank you, Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Grimley. I don't particularly like it, but I don't see any reason to not support it. So I propose accepting officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Could the officers confirm if this is being used as an HMO? I've got a sneaking feeling it might be. So could the officers confirm yes or no?
I think the officers can come back, but I think that comes under a different application. I don't think it is any intention at this stage to be an HMO, and it would have to come back, but maybe one of the officers could clarify that.
It's the planning application. The planning application is for a C3 dwelling, so there's no C4 use, and it would need consent in Loughborough to change use.
Okay. Councillor Camsell.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm very unhappy with the building going so close to the tree belt. I mean, that old railway is a beautiful wildlife corridor spreading from Shepshire, comes right through the estate into Loughborough. Already further up the track, we're having to the Borough Council having to pay to have an oak tree taken out. because it's apparently affecting the foundations of a nearby house. So could we have something in writing to say if it gets passed that no trees will be damaged or taken down if there is any damage to the extension? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Camsell. I think one of those problems might be that if a tree becomes dead or dangerous, we can't say it can't be taken down. So that's something that would have to be looked at. Councillor Snart.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Could I just, through you, just ask a few questions or 2 or 3 questions to officers? It goes around this extension will not take a subservient form. Now, I understood in policy 817 that was the main crux of it, in terms of saying that any planning application for an extension, the extension should be subservient to the main building, and I don't see that. I understand it's in a position where they say this doesn't matter probably, but for design and high quality design, I believe that should be the case, and I'd be interested. I'll get officers' view on that. And then if we go to the impact on 37 and 39, it talks about the works would be a minimum of 14 metres. Could we just get from officers what that should be if it goes through the design SPD, and what that distance should be, or it does meet the actual criteria? And finally, if we look at 37, it's talking about one of the windows being obscure glazed. Should that be in a condition when we actually approve this?
Thank you. I have another speaker, 2 speakers, but did Jacqueline, did you want to come back first, Jacqueline Jackson, on those points raised, and then I'll move back to Councillor Ranson and then Councillor Lowe? And then I think
thank
that's
you.
quite good.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Snart, to go through your points, policy H17 doesn't have a specific requirement for an extension to be subservient. That is part of our design guidance. Councillor Grimley referred to the old housing extension design guidance that's now been superseded by the new supplementary planning document for design. That recommends that extensions should be subservient, but that's only policy. It's not, I mean, that's only guidance, not policy. The actual wording within H17 is that a development has to remain compatible in scale, mass, design, and the use of materials when compared to the original dwelling house. And then it talks about not being intrusive or incongruous feature within street scenes to the detriment of visual amenity. And then obviously it goes on to talk about amenity of neighbours. So in terms of the design, members do have to make a judgment about whether that design is acceptable. If it's not, then obviously we can look at that, and we can look around any potential wordings, but there's nothing about subserviency. In terms of the distances, the supplementary planning document does have a recommendation of 21 metres between elevations that contain habitable rooms, but really that's talking about back-to-back distances where you have private garden or private amenity space between those elevations to protect privacy of those most sensitive private areas. This is obviously looking over the frontage of properties, over the shared driveway. So that's a different type of relationship, one that isn't really covered within the SPD, and one which members will have to make their own judgment on. I mean, it's not unusual to get that sort of distance in private drives. Indeed, that is the existing distance on that private driveway. And I'm very sorry, I know there was a third question. Maybe you could just remind me about the third question.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Could I just ask, it does talk about a glazed window, obscured glazed. Should that be in the conditions?
Yeah, there is 2 windows on that frontage elevation. One of them is stated as obscure glaze because it's to a bathroom. Members, if they felt it necessary to retain that window as obscure glaze, you could protect it. It wasn't considered necessary from officers. It's in the same position, you know, just over a little bit from existing clear windows in the existing front elevation. So we didn't think it was necessary. But again, that's up to members to reconsider and make your own judgment on.
I'm going to ask Councillor Ransom has asked to speak, which I'm going to do now. I can still hear and I can still see, but my dog wants to go out and there's no one else in the house. So just to let you know, but I can hear.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to second Councillor Tillison's proposal that we go with officer's recommendation, because I've looked at all the conditions that the officers have installed in their report. And yes, I would, Councillor Snart, you've preempted me with regarding the glazed window, which is actually overseen onto another property. And I'm happy if Councillor Tillison is happy to make that as one of the conditions, that that second window is glazed as well. But I'm happy to second this and go with officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to go along with that, Chair.
Thank you. I did have earlier, I had Councillor Lowe, but he doesn't want to now. I go back to Councillor Camsell, and then this is the final speaker, I believe, on this one. I have no other indication, and we have got a proposal on the table. So Councillor Camsell, just briefly, if you could, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, page 28 of the agenda does say a note to the applicant reminding them of the need to ensure there's no damage to the council-owned land. Could be attached to the consent. But, I mean, we've had other planning applications where tree roots have been asked to be protected. You know, can we do something like that, please? So I'm very worried about these trees being damaged.
Right, Jacqueline Jackson. No. Oh, and Councillor Forrest wanted to speak as well.
Yes. Sorry, yeah, we'll come back. Sorry, I thought that Karen Brightman would come back on the trees. Sorry about that. The trees have been looked at. We've taken advice from our tree officer, landscape officer, who has suggested that they have no objections and they didn't consider those conditions to be necessary. Obviously, if those experts did consider them to be necessary, they would be included in the report.
Councillor Forrest.
Thank you.
And then I am going to close the discussion.
Can you hear me, Madam Chairman?
Yes, thank you.
I will be very brief. I don't like this application. I think it is very over dominant in that street scene. However, I don't really think we've got grounds to turn it down. But thinking of the neighbours, on page 30, the final condition is number 7. Care should be taken during site works to make sure that hours of operation, methods of etc. Could we toughen that up a little bit and say no work before 8:30 or after 5 p.m. No work before 8:30 on Saturday or after 12 noon, and no working on Sundays or bank holidays.
I think I'll take advice on this, Councillor, but I think with the government advice at the moment that the councils are expected to relax as much as possible. We can put them in, I believe, but I will ask Jacqueline Jackson or our legal people to say, but we have been given government guidance on now as working.
Yeah, I think this might have been when Councillor Forrest was unable to hear us on the last item.
Quite possibly, yes.
So I'll just repeat it, just, you know, in the interest of fairness. The government have asked local, or have instructed local planning authorities to consider very carefully when they use hours conditions, and only put them on when it's absolutely necessary. This is because they've said that longer hours are acceptable in the current climate because of social distancing and the need for different tradesmen to come on site at different times. Now, if there is a disturbance, then there is other legislation outside of the planning controls that would deal with that. And for an extension, I would suggest that they're more than adequate, and we don't need to be controlling this through planning when it's already controlled through other legislation. That's my advice, and that given that, and given the government's guidelines, that you don't condition the hours of construction.
Well, I accept what is being said, of course, but I think it's rather hard luck on the neighbours. But let's go to the vote if you're ready.
I think Karen Brightman, did you want to come back?
Yes, there were just a couple of points I wanted to come back on before you take your vote. I wanted to understand whether you were still looking for a condition around restricting the garage being converted from a garage, and if so, what the reason behind that would be, because as we talked about earlier, it'd be very difficult to impose that condition with a parking basis behind it. But we had been pondering over whether you could do that on the grounds that it was restricting, that you wanted to restrict the dwelling itself being any bigger. The question around that is that I think members need to decide is whether there would be any harm. It's my view that there wouldn't be any harm actually in extending the dwelling in terms of it wouldn't be offending any planning policy. So it was just, I wanted to clarify that point. And also I wanted to come back, if I could, on the condition requiring opaque glazing of the windows at the front, to make sure we understood, if that was being recommended, which of those windows you'd be seeking to put obscure glazing in. It still would be my advice that it's not necessary to do that condition, because there isn't actually, or to attach that condition, because there isn't actually any infringement of any of the guidelines that are in the SPD, because as Jacqueline pointed out earlier, the 14 metres that there is between the front of those two properties isn't across private amenity space and is in fact an existing relationship. So I would be quite worried about attaching that condition, particularly if it was extended to the bedroom, because there's a possibility it could create a very poor internal environment to have a bedroom window that's obscure glazed. So it was just those two things I just wanted to come back on and just make sure that it was clear what you were voting for.
Okay, now then, Councillor Ransom, you raised something about the obscured glass. If it's not for a bathroom, does the glass at the front have to be obscured because it's facing the back?
So now that the explanation has been explained to me, I am happy with the officer's explanation. Okay. The only thing is that and it's only a suggestion, is if it's a bedroom and it's at the back, could it not be a Volux in the roof instead of an actual window outside overlooking? I don't, I'm not a planner, so I don't know, but I'm happy with the explanation. I don't know what Councillor Tillotson is feeling.
All right. Councillor Bailey, did you want to come back about the restriction of the
garage? Nobody else seems to have the same objection, so I'm happy to leave it.
Okay. So we've got a proposal on the table by Councillor Tillotson.
Chair, I don't know whether Councillor Snart wants to speak. He does have his hand
Oh,
raised.
sorry, yes, Councillor Snart.
Madam Chairman, thank you for that. It's just that I brought this up originally because in the notes it does say one facing number 37, one of this serve an ensuite which is likely to given the use of the room to be obscurely glazed. I don't know why officers brought it up if it wasn't a problem.
Councillor, just to clarify, these are windows that are on the front of the property facing another property, which is the front of their property. It's not rear elevations. And there's two proposed windows in the extension at first floor. One is an ensuite, which Councillor Snott is quite right, is highly likely to be obscure glazed. The second is to a bedroom and is the only window into that bedroom. So if you are going to be including a condition, we need to be very clear whether it's one window, just the bathroom, or both windows, and what the reason for that is. And also remember that the policy and the guidance requires us to give a good standard of amenity for both future occupiers as well as neighbours. So you have to consider the impact of what you're doing on future occupiers if you're going to have a bedroom with only obscure glazing, when there's a question about whether or not that is actually necessary to make the development acceptable. So yes, there is one bathroom, but there is also one bedroom on that front elevation.
Okay, right, can we move to the vote then, please? So it's been proposed.
Chair, before you do, I do really think that we need to understand whether Councillor Tillotson as the proposer is proposing an additional condition or not, because I don't think she's confirmed where her position is as the proposer.
Having listened to Mr. Brightman, I prefer to go with officer's proposal as our position.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, right, we've got proposed by Councillor Tillotson, seconded by Councillor Ransom. Could I see, I'll do a roll call. So Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bailey, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Campsell.
Councillor Campsell, against.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
Councillor Forrest, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Grimley here, against.
Right. Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Hamilton, 4.
Lowe.
Councillor Lowe, 4.
Councillor Ransom.
4.
Councillor John Savage. Councillor Savage. Councillor Savage, we can't, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Councillor Savage, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Snart.
Councillor Snart, against.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Against.
And Councillor Tillotson.
Councillor Tillotson, 4.
And Councillor Henry Fryer, 4. I think that will be confirmed by one of the officers. I have 9, 4 and 4 against.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Catherine Harrison speaking. Yes, I agree. We have the motion was carried with a vote of 9 for and 4 against the proposal.
Right, now I have had a message, or we have all had a message from Councillor Grimley asking for a 5-minute break. Now we only have one more item on this. I will ask the committee really whether a break, it never is 5 minutes, I'm afraid. And we have people waiting, but it's up to the committee whether you want a 5-minute break. I will be very strict though. If you're not back in 5 minutes, you won't be able to take part in the next, you know, if you miss any of the presentation. But we have one more application, and then we finish. But
Madam Chairman, could we just ask if Councillor Grimley it's for a comfort break?
Yes, it was for a comfort break.
right, I appreciate that. What we've got then, Councillor Bentley was going to take over now. So if Councillor Bentley wants to take over, how many people really need, can you just show me your hands? How many people need to leave the meeting at this stage?
I think we should just watch Councillor Grimley suffer, Chair.
Well, that's a bit cruel. But I've got Councillor Camsell says he wants a break, and Councillor Grimley wants a break. Now, really, chaps, you've got to be so quick, because I've got a supper. And also, you know, we want to carry on with this. So
I'll be very quick.
And if you're not back, now you've all got to mute and turn your microphones off, because unfortunately we did hear last time someone actually going to the loo. So quick. Right, and Ian, you'll be taking over now. Oh, we've got more people than just councillor. We've got someone else going as well. 3 or 4 people. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I propose that we reconvene then at 18:40, which gives everybody 4 minutes. I hope that's going to be long enough.
Yeah, and if they're not back, Ian?
Well, we set off at in 4 minutes' time.
Yeah, so you're taking over now.
Okay.
And you've got your script and everything. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Okie dokie.
Right. So 4 minutes then, chaps.
Righto.
That includes myself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ian, I think everybody's back.
Right, okay, well, hopefully everybody's back in the meeting, and we now move on to item 3, P/20/0566/2, 31 Garendon Road, Shepshed, pages 32 to 55. It's going to start with a presentation by the officer, Lewis Marshall. After he's spoken, then we're going to move to the speakers. So, Mr. Marshall, if you'd like to start now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just waiting for these slides to be shown.
It'll be all right on the night. Right, okay, thank you. So for item 3, we go back to Shepshed. We're at land at and to the rear of 31 Garendon Road. And the application proposes the demolition of number 31 Garendon Road and the creation of 8 new dwellings with associated landscaping and access. Before I start the presentation, I would like to bring members' attention to an additional late representation made by Shepshed Town Council received this morning. So it isn't in the written update sheet provided to members. And the contents of that late representation states that Charlwood Borough Council was alerted to the fact that there was wildlife present within this area of land, badgers set, etc. However, when this was mentioned to Charlwood Borough Council didn't appear to want to know anything until a formal application was submitted. For the record, officers dispute this account, and the council's senior ecologist visited the site within 2 days of receiving the complaint regarding site clearance that had taken place. The town council was subsequently informed that the site clearance that had taken place would not have required planning permission and therefore was unable to intervene. The late representation received by the council does not affect the officer's recommendation, and the impact of the development in terms of biodiversity is considered on pages 43 and 44 of the report. Next slide, please. So in terms of the site location plan, the red line shows the site area, which encompasses 31 Garrington Road, which would be demolished to provide vehicular access to the site. The site is located within the settlement limits of Shepshed, in close proximity to the town centre to the north. The area is residential in character, with the boundaries of the site surrounded by existing residential gardens to properties along Garrington Road to the north and St Winifred Road to the south. The eastern site boundary is bound by a brook which runs from the sort of Charnwood Hills to the south, and it runs in northerly direction and is largely culverted underneath the town centre. Next slide, please. So the aerial photograph provides better insight into the site's characteristics. So as you can see, the site is largely covered by grass and vegetation and a high number of trees, which many have been removed prior to the submission of any planning application. However, many have been retained along the site's boundaries, particularly along the western site boundary, where it abuts the brook. The built character of the area is eclectic in style, with a mix of Victorian, Edwardian and post-war development along Garrington Road. St Winifred Road to the south is characterised by post-war local authority and ex-local authority social housing, with a small terrace of 3 more recently built council-owned properties immediately to the south. Next slide, please. So moving on to the site photos, these 3 images show the site's context from Garrington Road. The first picture on the upper left of the screen shows the bungalow at 31 Garrington Road in the middle of the row. Number 31 can be seen behind the lamppost. So number 31 would be demolished to provide access between properties either side, which consist of number 33 to the left, which is a bungalow of the same style and design as number 31, and number 29 to the right, which is a more modern detached property. The image on the right is looking west up the hill towards Charnwood Road and shows the more Victorian Edwardian character of Garrington Road. And the picture at the bottom shows Garrington Road looking east and a more mixed built forms consisting of post-war residential properties and sort of large ex-industrial buildings which have been converted. Next slide, please. So that members can understand the relationship with the neighbouring properties either side of 31 Garrington Road, these images show the rear and side of those properties. So number 29 Garrington Road at the top shows the detached garage and a shed that are positioned along the boundary with what would be the access road. And number 33 Garrington Road is shown in the image below. Next slide, please. So moving on to the site itself, the first image at the top is taken from within the site and shows the wider site context with the large group of trees that sit along the site's western boundary, which you can see in the background there. The image below is looking north and the arrow there is pointing to 31 Garrington Road, which again, as I said, would be demolished to make way for the vehicular access. Next slide, please. Again, these images are taken from within the site, but from the western edge of the site. The first image looking northeast to the rear of properties along Garrington Road, with the position of number 31 marked by the arrow. The image below is looking southeast, with the nearest neighbouring property seen on the left of the image, which is the more recently constructed terrace at St Winifred Road. Next slide, please. So in terms of what is being proposed as part of the application, development would consist of 8 detached dwellings with a 50% split of 3 and 4 bedroom properties laid out around a central courtyard turning area with a detached garage block to the northern boundary. In terms of parking, each 3 bedroom dwelling would have 2 parking spaces and each 4 bedroom dwelling would have 3 parking spaces, which is in accordance with the local highway authority's guidance. 2 visitor spaces are also proposed to the west of the garage block. The properties themselves consist of 2 and 2.5 storey properties with subservient single storey elements shown on the plan by the lighter colour shaded sections positioned to the rear of each dwelling. Each dwelling is considered to have an adequate sized garden, and the layout incorporates a 7-metre wide wildlife corridor along the site's western edge. I should point out that this is erroneously stated in the report as 5 metres wide. There is also space for a planted water attenuation areas across the northern boundary, which would also provide a buffer to neighbouring properties along Garendon Road, and a further attenuation feature is proposed within the central courtyard area. The access would be lined by a proposed brick wall either side and contains a bin presentation area of which details would be required by planning condition. Next slide, please. So the application proposes two different house types which are handed in their design. This slide shows the 4-bed houses at plots 2, 3, 6 and 7. And like all the proposed plots, would be externally faced in an off-white render with a red brick plinth and dark blue slate style cement roof tiles. Next slide, please. Just to give members an idea of the internal layout, so this slide shows the floor plans, which are a fairly conventional layout with integral garage, which are large enough to comfortably accommodate a vehicle. And as I said, this is the 4-bed house type with obviously the 4 bedrooms and the 2 bathrooms at first floor level. Next slide, please. This slide shows the other 3-bed house type, which sort of bookends either row of 4 either side of the site. And again, it would be the same external materials used throughout. Most notably, this house type features a bedroom in the roof space. So this is a 2.5-story property, but there are no dormer windows, just small roof lights proposed in the rear roof slope. Next slide, please. And this is the internal floor plan, which again is fairly conventional with living space at ground floor and obviously 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms above. Next slide, please. And finally, this is the street scene image that shows how the row of 4 would appear as a group together, and obviously with the detached garage block there, which is to be of brick construction with a hipped roof. Next slide, please. So overall, the application has been carefully assessed against the comments and consultation responses received and the policies of the development plan and the National Planning Policy Framework. Members will be aware that decisions on applications need to be made in accordance with the adopted development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. In terms of the principle of development, proposals are in a sustainable location within walking distance of Shepshire Town Centre and are supported by policy CS1 of the core strategy. Whilst the council can currently demonstrate 5.52 years housing land supply, the benefit of additional housing in this sustainable location should be attributed significant positive weight. It is considered that the proposals closely relate to the built form and settlement character of this area of Shepshire and would preserve amenity for existing residents. The highway impact of this development, both on a standalone basis and cumulatively, is considered to be acceptable, and no objection is raised by the local highway authority. The ecological assessment has also been carefully considered, along with the opportunity to mitigate impacts both on-site and off-site through securing a financial contribution. Finally, concerns with regards to flooding and drainage can be managed and controlled through appropriate conditions. So therefore, the application is recommended for approval as set out on page 47 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. We've now got 3 speakers. I'm going to ask for the first speaker, who's the objector, David McDowell, to speak first. Second, after him, it'll be the agent, Jonah Maston. And lastly, it'll be Councillor Popley, the ward councillor. So can I call, please, David McDowell to speak for 5 minutes?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak. Why is Charnwood Planning so in favour of a development that will have such a negative impact on what has been seen as one of the most quiet and attractive roads in which to live in Shepshire? This development is opposed by so many people because it will have such a negative impact on residents who have enjoyed the peace and tranquility of this road for many years. Do we really need 8 more houses, like many of the unsold properties on the new housing developments in and around Shepshire? Not only will these 8 houses negatively impact on so many existing residents, it will also pose an unacceptable risk to the many vulnerable children who use this road to get to school. Shepshed is in need of affordable homes and bungalows. How does this development address this need? Where is the evidence that we need 8 more 3 and 4 bedroom homes? This site is not on the local plan site allocation. Parking and traffic is a problem on Garrington Road, despite the claims made by the Plans Committee report that the speed survey is a robust piece of evidence because it was apparently undertaken on a working day between the hours of 9:30 and 12:30. The survey was in fact taken at Christmas when schools, the playgroup and some businesses were on holiday and any commuters had already departed. The planning report claims that there are less than 39 cars per hour. We counted 67 cars an hour last Sunday during lockdown. Furthermore, we understand that on 2 previous occasions, planning officers rejected proposals to include additional vehicular access to and from Garrington Road. Charnwood Borough Council Pest Control have been called out to this site many times because of the rats that live in the small stream alongside the substation. Will the bin stores, which are to be sited outside the front door of number 29, not attract even more vermin to the area? We dispute the argument put forward by the planning team that this development is compatible with the character of the houses on this road. The planning team are trying to argue that the type of housing is eclectic in nature, with no strong prevailing pattern of development. This road is largely comprised of Victorian and Edwardian housing, with a very small number of modern houses that have been built as space has become available. Building more modern housing within the small space will further erode the character of this road, the very reason that many chose to live here. Shepshed is becoming so overdeveloped that we need to hang on every little bit of its history. Garrington Road is part of that. Yes, people need housing, but not of the type proposed on this development. Why is the planning team not looking at the provision of more affordable homes and bungalows instead of encouraging backland sites to be used for the kind of housing we don't need? The planning team have not addressed this issue of noise and would increase with this development, other than stating that a brick wall would reduce traffic noise. Since the trees were removed, the noise levels have increased and will be impacted even further once new residents move into these 8 houses. What is being done to mitigate these concerns? How does this development benefit the residents of Shepshed? It does not address the local housing need and has a devastating impact on the local wildlife, including bats, newts, badgers and hedgehogs, which live on the site, and the lives of existing residents within both Garrington Road and St Winifred's Road. What will the offset payment of £69,000 be used for, and how?
I've muted David McDowell because he has reached his 5-minute time limit.
Nikki, if you can hear me, I've just lost, I can't see anything of the screen. Okay, it's just come back up. Okay, thank you. Can I ask now for the agent for the developer, Joan Mastin, to speak now? Again, you have 5 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you well, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, all. In respect of the proposal to erect 8 new dwellings on land at 31 Garrington Road, we believe that this application has considerable planning merit, a result of detailed and productive dialogue with Lewis Marshall, the case officer. Mr. Marshall's report comprehensively describes how the design accords with local and national development policy. In addition to his report, though, I'd like to highlight the following themes. Firstly, the development site is a highly sustainable one, situated inside the Shepshed limits to development, in a quiet residential area with an established network of roads, services and facilities nearby. Creating additional windfall homes here will coincide with Charnwood Borough Council's strategic vision for Shepshed, as per policy CS1 of their core strategy. Delivery of new homes at this site will provide family accommodation that might otherwise require extension of the townscape or further urban sprawl. The proposal would also augment the Shepshed community through the gain of new residents and a substantial investment in the town's future. Secondly, the proposed site layout is considerate and respectful of the setting. To support site ecology, for example, a 7-metre strip of land to the east is to be preserved as a wilderness habitat. 12 original trees are to be protected and retained, and 2 swales and a feature pond would be created for surface water collection. To allay concerns over neighbour amenity and privacy, the new homes enjoy generous gardens that reduce the potential for overlooking. Similarly, they are oriented at 90 degrees to Garendon Road residences, preventing direct visual access from new properties into the existing ones. The straight access road and central turning area keep vehicle movements away from the plot edges, mitigating traffic noise and vibration. And to promote a pleasant character, garage parking is provided for 7 of the 8 houses, so avoiding a street scene that is cluttered with vehicles. The third theme is that the proposal provides good quality homes. The modest quantum of development has allowed for space around each dwelling such that off-street parking and well-sized rear gardens are provided with external passages. Natural surveillance of the site would be improved by the development, replacing an unused and overgrown plot that was easily accessible for antisocial activity with a series of well-maintained properties that are managed and safely overseen by individual householders. Lastly, the fourth theme is that the proposal was primarily called in because of concerns that it will cause unacceptable traffic impact. We acknowledge that changes to traffic volume and flow can cause existing residents to worry. It is for this very reason that a professional transport consultancy was engaged on the project to identify and analyse transport impact and to mitigate them through design recommendations. Hence, following a site survey and extensive background research, we can confirm that the proposal meets local highway standards in terms of geometry, visibility space and manoeuvring space, that development would result in an additional traffic movement on Garendon Road every 10 minutes on average, which does not represent a significant change to the existing traffic conditions. We can confirm that accident records reveal there have been no accidents near to the site over the most...
Nikki, can I just confirm whether that was the 4-minute bell or whether that was the...
That's a 4-minute bell.
Okay,
So,
all right.
Joni, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I shall wrap up. The validity of these conclusions has been questioned because of the date and timing of the site survey. Crucially, Development Control and the Local Highways Authority have raised no such objection or concern. On the issue of parked cars and their effect on visibility, the Local Highways Authority have clarified that on-street parking is common, but does not appear to create significant problems in practice. Equally, the manual states that drivers will tend to take additional care where visibility is limited, which may lead to a desirable level of extra caution. In view of this fact and the other positive themes raised, this application should be permitted in line with the officer recommendation. Thank you kindly for your time.
Thank you. If we can now call Councillor Popley. Again, you have 5 minutes to speak. Again, Nikki will give you a ding on the bell when there's 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. For the second time this evening, thank you for permitting me a chance to speak at this meeting. P/20/0566/2, to which P/19/1322/2 refers, is a proposal which aims to have 8 new dwellings built upon land to the rear of 31 Garendon Road, Shepshed. As you will note from the report before you all, I have serious reservations concerning both the traffic impact this development will create, if granted, and moreover the ecological damage it will cause. Notwithstanding, I will highlight other concerns within my speech. Paragraph 4 on page 32 of your agendas explicitly highlights how this application is a resubmission of the previously withdrawn P/19/132/2. One of the issues previously cited was the layout, impact on neighbouring properties, and somewhat interestingly, the noted impact upon ecology. Having had discussions with ecologists on this very issue, I have been reliably informed that Shepshire, as a town, has very few preserved ecological areas. Therefore, I am left wondering how developing upon land where wildlife has nested can be a positive. I note the proposal intends to build a wildlife corridor. However, I still feel that any damage to current natural habitats can never fully be offset by wildlife corridors. In lieu of these concerns, it is all but guaranteed that there will be numerous vehicles required to access the site in order to build, adding more air pollution, further decreasing what ecological capacity remains. This seemingly does not align with values set out in CS12 and CS13 of the Charnwood Local Plan, as highlighted on page 33 of tonight's papers. I would also urge members to note various regulations set out on page 37. Members will also see from tonight's papers that there have been 29 letters of objection to this proposal from 32 different people or addresses. Among their concerns also allude to both traffic and ecological impact. I touched upon loss of wildlife habitats already, but you will also note from the extensive list before you that the loss of trees also ranks very highly among reasons for objection to this. Again, this closely relates to policy EV/1 of the 2004 local plan. There are also wider concerns regarding drainage, which will heighten flood risk. Additionally, concerns have been raised about the proposed bin store and associated detrimental problems which may arise from it. Moving on to traffic itself, and you will note from tonight's report on page 44, saved policy TR/18 of the Charnwood Local Plan is referenced. There is also reference to paragraphs 108 and 109 of the National Policy Framework. You will see how, amongst the plethora of variables it deals with, there is a stipulation for 2 parking spaces for 3-bedroom dwellings and 3 parking spaces for 4-bedroom dwellings. I can confirm from my own experiences of this road and that of my residents, parking is by and large utilised on street. Without wishing to preempt people's behaviour, it does trouble me that the idea of having more vehicles added to the locality could increase the likelihood of accidents and, in particular, the ability for emergency vehicles to access the proposed cul-de-sac. For context, the proposed development affects an existing dwelling, which is on a very tight bend along Garrington Road, far from ideal for traffic. Statistics passed on to me by residents over the last few days have seen vehicles in excess of 60 cars per hour use this road as a commuter point, and during the height of lockdown, this figure was again only shy of 60. The speed survey, which has been quoted in the report, appears to have been conducted outside school hours and most commuter traffic hours. Should tonight's proposal be passed, I would ask for a renewed traffic survey to be conducted during peak times to move away from the perception of low-level traffic. There is also a taxi business and post office in the area, which again sees traffic issues at various times. Finally, the report highlights how Garrington Road is eclectic as a street scene. Again, most of the dwellings which are in and around this locality are Victorian and Edwardian houses and follow a similar form of design. Therefore, the proposed design of the new dwellings will again be out of keeping with the majority of the street scene, which is always highlighted as being a major contributing factor for approval. There also appears to be some discrepancies over the proposed placement of windows. No provision has either been made for affordable housing in this proposal, and these concerns are also shared by Campaign to Protect Rural England, Charnwood, and Shepshire Town Council in their own extensive comments. I can understand how members may see a link to CS1 of the local plan. However, I strongly feel that there still remains some serious unanswered questions about the prospective detrimental effects of granting this proposed scheme or its predecessor on both traffic and also ecology. Thank you again for listening.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask Lewis Marshall if you would like to comment on what anything that the 3 speakers has asked or commented on in their presentations.
Yes, if I may, please, Chair. I think I've got all the points, but if I haven't, I'm sure my officer colleagues will jump in. In terms of ecology first, Councillor Popley is right that the proposal would result in a loss of biodiversity on the site, and obviously we've acknowledged that in the report. And obviously that is corroborated within the submitted biodiversity impact assessment. But obviously, as stated in the report and the PPF, it's clear that when there is a loss of biodiversity on the site, this loss can be compensated for off-site, which is the reason for the £67,000 financial contribution as set out on page 43 of the report. In terms of how this contribution would be spent, we would need to identify a project if members were minded to go with the officer recommendation, and the
council's senior ecologist has commenced a dialogue with the town council and ward councillors in identifying potential land and projects where this money could be spent. I should confirm that the project would need to be within Shepshed, and where and how that money would be spent would be confirmed within the legal agreement, which is to be negotiated. In terms of affordable housing, it is well established both within national and local policy that only sites that provide 10 or more dwellings are required to provide a proportion of affordable housing. The application proposes a net increase of 7 dwellings. Therefore, it is some way off the trigger for securing any affordable housing units as part of the application. In terms of highway matters, I think Mr McDowell raised that there's been other instances where accesses onto Garendon Road have been refused. I've looked into the history. I'm not aware of any recent examples. It may have been under a different planning policy context prior to the NPPF in 2012, which is quite clear that there now has to be a severe impact on highway safety in order for it to be refused. Notwithstanding this, obviously each application must be considered on its individual merits, and the local highway authority have raised no objection to the application or indeed the access proposals or to the information submitted to support the application. There was also a comment on the bin store, which is proposed within the access road. Now, the bin store would be the idea of the bin store is to be used as a bin presentation area on bin collection days only. So residents would obviously, after the bins have been collected, they will take them back to their individual properties. It wouldn't be used as a permanent store for bins. I think there was also comments about obviously the loss of the bungalow at number 31 Garendon Road. Now, policy CS3 of the core strategy seeks an appropriate mix of housing, having regard for the character of the area and identified local needs. So whilst it is accepted that there is an identified need for bungalows across the borough, there is also a need generally for more housing, and on balance, the loss of the bungalow is outweighed by the increase in housing stock generally in what is a sustainable location. Yeah, I think that's everything, but whether my colleagues want to add anything.
Jacqueline Jackson, do you want to add anything to the comments made by Lewis Marshall?
No, Chair.
Karen Brightman, have you got anything else to add?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Well, so far there's just one person in the queue, that's Councillor Tassell. So take it away, Councillor Tassell.
I've sat and listened to this, and I'm absolutely gobsmacked. To start off with, the agent who had the traffic assessments done, you go down that road, you take your life in your hands. Immediately you turn in to that road, you are taking your own life in your own hands. I'm sorry, but it really is very, very bad. The thing is and that nobody's mentioned it, is the fact that Charnwood Road have got no parking at their houses, so they park in Garendon Road. Kirk Hill have got no parking on their Victorian terraces, so they park in Garendon Road. It's not just the people with parking in Garendon Road, but also they are parking in the off-road. Garendon Crescent has got more parking in that crescent than there is on the Garendon Road. It's ridiculous what's happening down there. Nobody has looked to say what's going to happen at that long access to these houses. It's going to be parked with people out of Garendon Road coming into that to park. So it's going to be just the same as the Garendon close up the road. The second thing is, I'm shocked that we've got 4-bedroom houses being built in Shepshed when we've got 2 big estates at the end of the Shepshed where they can't sell the houses. And this is in the town centre where we've got a post office, we've got shops, we've got Asda, we've got or we've got Tesco at the top of the road. This is the thing, is the fact that we need bungalows, we need houses for starters homes. And I'm not saying build affordable homes, but I'm saying homes that can be afforded by young people with families. These will be expensive homes, and they're not for that area. We really do need something that is more in keeping with a young family. Garages and storage. The chap said, the agent said, cars will be put in garages. How many people put their cars in garages? Very, very few. In fact, all the houses in our lane have got garages, but very few put their cars in them. And they say it's not big enough for affordable houses. Well, I'm not saying it is big enough for affordable houses in the way that we look at affordable houses, but I do think it should be made possible for and a better type of house for younger people to get on the housing ladder. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Snart, sorry, Councillor Campbell is next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to mirror what Councillor Tassel said, really. I know the area and the parking's shocking, you know, so to create more cars is ridiculous. And also, I mean, the wildlife once again loses out, going to be devastated. It was a beautiful area before, now it's going to be devastated. Just a bit shocked that they come, and we don't need the houses. We've got a 6-year supply, I believe, you know, and as Councillor Tassel said, we do need starter homes for young kids in Shepshire. That's what we need. So I'm against the idea, really.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Snart. Councillor Snart.
I'm there. Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah, carry on. Thank you.
Just on the ecology side, I was just interested. I think I heard right saying that the agent said the existing trees would be protected. Could we just establish that? And then the other thing I have, and be interested to hear from the officers, is that Hedner suggests that 2 beds should take up about 35%, 25 to 35% of any development. I know now that we've got 3 and 4 bedroom here. Is there a reason that we've not actually stuck to the Hedner relationships with 2, 3 and 4 bed houses?
Okay, before I take the next speaker, can I just go back to Lewis Marshall for comment on what Councillor Snart has just asked?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In terms of the trees that are within the site which are to be retained, now, not to confuse matters, they wouldn't be protected by a tree preservation order. They would be obviously marked on any landscaping plan which we would need to approve, and there is a condition that recommends sort of a detailed landscaping scheme to be submitted. And there's also a landscape management plan condition as well. So the retention and the management of those trees on the site would be subject to the details which we would approve via the use of those conditions. In terms of the Hedner mix, obviously Hedner is just one material consideration. It's not a determinative factor when considering housing mix overall. Obviously, this is a minor development. It's only proposing 8 dwellings, so it is quite difficult to apply the sort of percentages which are suggested by Hedner. But also, you have to have regard for the sort of character and appearance of the area. You know, if you were looking at more smaller properties, you'd be looking at a higher number of dwellings on the site overall, which again would have implications in terms of number of parking spaces, number of vehicular movements. So it is considered by officers that the scheme that is before members strikes a good balance in terms of housing mix and housing numbers overall.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Next speaker is Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking down the, take the point about the garages can be used as storage, and this is sort of fairly tight parking layout. I can't see through the conditions, any conditions requiring the garages to be retained as garages. That's something I'd certainly want to see to be added. Perhaps the officer can confirm whether that's in the conditions or not.
Yes, could I ask Mr. Marshall to come back on that point, please?
Yes, certainly. Condition 19 on page 51 of the report states that notwithstanding the provisions of the Town and Country Planning Order 2008, no enlargement, improvement or other alterations of the dwellings, including conversions of garages to living accommodation, shall be carried out. So yes, we are recommending as officers that permitted development rights are removed to prevent any future occupiers from converting their garages to living accommodation.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Next speaker is Councillor Tillotson. Sorry, Mr. Councillor Grimley, did you want to come back?
Yeah, no, I just want to come back that I think that was quite important. I'd missed it on the very bottom of the condition. So I'd like to propose officer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that proposition?
I was going to propose, so I'll second officer recommendation. I've listened to what everyone's said, and I do agree it would have been nice to have seen affordable houses, but as Mr. Marshall said, if we'd had affordable houses on this site, it would have been more houses, which would have led to more traffic. So on balance, I think it's probably the best solution for this site. So that's why I'm seconding officer recommendation.
Thank you. I'm not showing anybody else at the moment wishing to speak, although I think that Councillor Bailey's hand was up. Councillor Bailey, did you want to come in?
Just very briefly, if I may, Chair, thank you. I presume if we go officers' recommendations, we're looking at recommendation A and B in regard to section 106 agreement. And then the proposed sort of ecological area that's being retained along the brook, is there a management plan in place for that, and who is actually maintaining that?
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, can you come back on that, please?
Yes, so the management of the ecological wildlife corridor would be subject to the sort of landscape management plan, which would cover the entire site. And the developer would need to establish a management company or take on a management company that would obviously carry out the management responsibilities, which would be set out in the management plan, which we would approve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have Councillor Camsell wishing to speak next.
Thank you, Chair. If it does get passed, I mean, could I ask for some Swift bricks to be built into the gables of the houses, as Shepshed is a popular area for Swifts in this time of year, please?
Mr. Marshall, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, on that point, I would just bring members' attention to condition 15, which requires the development to be carried out in accordance with the ecological mitigation strategy, and that does list as a minimum some requirements. So so there is, as part of the requirements, there is a requirement that bat roosting features are incorporated as part of the buildings. On reflection, there isn't one that requires bird boxes, but it is within members' gifts to add that as part of the condition should they wish to.
Okay, well, I'll just note that for now. Can I move on to Councillor Lowe?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would have proposed this, but you know what the officers just said about management company for Hayes houses. Can we ensure that management company is in place for perpetuity? Because I can see it just going to look a bit derelict if it's left. For 8 houses, I can't see a management company taking it on. which does concern me a little bit.
If I could just ask Mr. Marshall to come back on that point, please. Mr. Marshall?
So, yes. Bear with me, I'll just have a quick reread of the conditions. Yes, so condition 7. Yes, so condition 7, again, it requires the applicant to submit a landscape management plan, which obviously we would need to consider as part of any discharge of condition application. Now, obviously the time frame of that management plan would need to be encompassed within the management plan itself, and obviously we would have regard for the timing of it. So yes, we would have to require that it would be managed in perpetuity over the lifetime of the development.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just come back, Chair, on that? In terms of the management company, obviously there would still be an owner to that land, whether that is kept by the developer or split between the ownership of the properties is not for us to wonder or control. But if for any reason that management was to falter and it wasn't managed in accordance with the approved details of condition 7, we would be able to take action against the owner of the land, which will obviously be accessible to us.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lowe, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, please, Chair. We've all had problems with estates being built all over the place that are owned. I could think of a couple in Thurmiston that were owned by builders that builders have disappeared. Fitchett's was one of them. I'm just a little bit concerned that it's not going to be kept in another 10 years or 15 years, and all the residents around there will have this problem of derelict land. I would just like to see some guarantee. I don't know how you do that, but I'm just concerned about it. I'd rather it be handed over to the Borough Council, to be honest, so we could look after it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lowe. Do you want to come back on that, Mr. Marshall? Mr. Marshall?
No, thank you, Chair. I've got nothing to add other than what's been said previously by myself and obviously Jackie Jackson.
Okay, thank you. Now, next up is Councillor Campsell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just about my Swift boxes. Can we have some or not, please?
Councillor Campsell, I was just waiting to see if anybody else wanted to add, or it's been proposed by Councillor Grimley. I just wanted to wait and see if anybody else got anything to add to his proposition before approaching him to see if he wants to add Swift bird boxes onto the proposal. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to wait till the end to ask that one. So if we could just take Councillor Bailey next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I just want to second what Councillor Lowe has been talking about, and if Councillor Grimley be minded that we add that to the recommendation.
Councillor Bailey, sorry, is that Jacqueline Jackson? Did you want to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to question what was being included as part of that recommendation. It is beyond this committee's power to say whether or not a piece of land will be adopted by the council. That's done outside the local planning authority, so we can't do that here. And Lewis Marshall has already said that the condition does provide us with the control of saying how it's going to be managed in perpetuity. I think that is as much as we can do, and that would be my professional recommendation.
Thank you for that. I'm not showing any more hands up. Before I put it to the vote, is there anybody else who would like to make any comment or add anything else as a recommendation as to what we'd wish to happen on this site? It's been proposed by Councillor Grimley, seconded by Councillor Tillotson. Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Um,
Sorry,
I just want to ask if it's possible for restrict the parking restrictions to put in on the drive, because the people won't get to their homes when people out of Guindon Road are parking on it. If it goes ahead, which it obviously is going to do, I'm just asking if some kind of parking restriction can be put on the drive into the estate.
Thank you. I would have thought that as an entrance into an estate or a developed area, that there'd be no parking across that drive. I would have thought, but I'm going to ask Mr. Marshall to come back on that, or Jacqueline Jackson. Would you like to come back on that, Jacqueline? The question was with regard.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. The access drive is a private drive. It won't be adopted by the council, so won't have any traffic orders across it. Obviously, if people were to park on there, it was private land, and that would be for that to deal with. But you know, it's not going to be adopted highway. It will be a private access drive. I don't know if Lewis wanted to add.
Mr. Marshall, do you want to add anything extra to that?
Nothing to add. Nothing to add there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can I call on Councillor Fryer, please?
I was just going to ask if the proposer will be willing to accept Councillor Campbell's addition, extra condition about Swift boxes.
I'm happy to set that. Can you say, Chair? Yeah, I'm happy to set that condition and delegate the exact wording to the officer on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Grimley. And we just go to Councillor Tillotson. Are you happy as seconder with that?
That's why I raised my hand. I do have concerns, actually. I'm not sure. I understand Councillor Campbell's concerns about ecology. I share concerns about ecology, but I'm not sure on two-storey buildings that Swift boxes are appropriate. I mean, I lived in a flat many years ago that was 4 stories that had Swift boxes, and I don't think two-storey buildings are high enough for Swifts to actually use the boxes. So I'm not sure it's a good idea.
If I could just come back in on that, personal experience, where I live, I have single-storey stables, and we have a lot of Swifts coming back every year.
All
so,
right, I accept that then. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Campbell?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that these bricks go in the gables of the buildings, so they're like 3 stories high.
Okay, absolutely. I'm happy with that. If I think it's a sensible addition. I don't see anybody else's hands up, so it's been proposed by Councillor Grimley to go with officers' recommendations A and B, with the addition that bird boxes for Swift should be added to all the properties within the location, and that's been seconded by Councillor Tillotson. I propose to ask everybody in turn whether you're for or against the proposition. So I'm going to start with Councillor Bailey.
Councillor Bailey, for.
Councillor Campbell.
Councillor Campbell, for.
Councillor Forrest. Councillor Forrest.
Councillor Forrest, against.
Thank you. Councillor Fryer.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Grimley, for.
Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Hamilton, for.
Councillor Lowe.
Councillor Lowe, for.
Councillor Ransom.
For.
Councillor Savage.
Councillor Savage, against.
Councillor Snart.
Councillor Snart, for.
Councillor Tassell.
Against.
Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. For.
And Councillor Ian Bentley, myself, I'm for. So I'll make that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I count that as 10 for and 3 against. I'm just going to ask for confirmation from the officer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree. As motion was carried as officer's recommendation with the amended condition to include swift in a vote of 10 for the proposition and 3 against.
Right, thank you. That item is passed. Right, item 6, list of applications determined under delegated powers. This list of applications determined by officers is set out on pages 55 to 65. Please use the raised hand feature if you would like to ask a question. I don't see any hands raised anywhere, so I'm taking that as no questions. So everybody's happy with that. Just for completion, I think it might be as well as, obviously, I can't see everybody's indicating in any other way. I'm just going to go down the list again to make sure everybody's happy with a list of applications determined under delegated powers. So starting with Councillor Bailey.
Yes, I'm happy, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Camsell.
Happy, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Forrest.
I am content, Chair. Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Fryer.
Yes, that's fine.
Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Grimley. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Councillor Hamilton.
Councillor Hamilton, yes, I'm happy.
Councillor Lowe.
I'm happy too, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ransom.
I'm happy, Chair.
Councillor Savage.
Councillor Savage, I'm happy, Chair.
Councillor Snart.
Councillor Snart, happy.
Councillor Tassell.
I'm happy.
Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy.
And myself, Councillor Ian Bentley, I'm happy also. So that's unanimous. So this brings the close of the meeting. And the next plans committee will be on the 16th.
Sorry, Chair. You've got item 7 for just for information.
Sorry. You're absolutely right, Vice Chair. I'll just deal with that. Urgent planning decision taken during COVID-19 pandemic. This report explains the action taken by the head of planning and regeneration to determine planning application P/20/0271/2, which was made under emergency provisions due to the pandemic, set out on pages 66 to 70. Can I just ask one of the officers just to talk us through that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as members will be aware, the pandemic caused a lockdown, which took a little while for the government to first release the legislation to allow committees like this to be held virtually, and then for us to get in place the necessary arrangements to hold those sort of committees. During that period, there was this application that would normally require determination by the plans committee under the constitution, but given the exceptional circumstances and the need for a decision to be made within the statutory period, decision was made under the allowance of the constitution in exceptional circumstances for the head of planning to make those decisions, and it was considered that the pandemic was one of those exceptional circumstances. And this report is just for information for members to inform you of that decision that you would have normally made, but given the situation was made by the head of planning.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. So I now close the meeting.
Yeah, Chair, so can I, sorry, Chair. Can I very quickly ask? I know we've got the reasons for it, but just a matter of interest, what was the application all about?
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Grimley. Members will probably remember the agenda was published, so this summarises that published agenda that was then cancelled. The application, from memory, was I believe it was change of use. It wasn't controversial. The reason it was being referred to Plans Committee was because a member of staff outside of the planning department in another department of the council was the applicant.
Councillor Grimley, does that satisfy you?
Yeah, that's fine. I was just curious, to be honest with you.
Okay, can I just ask if anybody else wants any more clarity on this, or did Jacqueline Jackson's explanation cover it? It did for me. Okay, nobody's speaking, so I'm taking it that was satisfied. So now, for the third time, going to close the meeting, and the next Plans Committee meeting will be held on the 16th of July at 5 p.m. Thank you all for attending.